This is a recording by Will Rogers, Jr. talking about his father, Will Rogers. The original recording is in the collection of the Will Rogers Memorial in Claremore, Oklahoma. It is being copied for permanent inclusion in the Oral History program on March 2, 1990 by Joe L. Todd.
To my sister Mary and my brother Jimmy and me, Will Rogers was just like any other father in a normal American family. We saw him come and go 1,000 times. We had dinner like everyone else. Dad read his paper and talked about what was going on in the world. He was always meeting the great and participating in great events, yet often the first we ever heard of it was when we would read about it in the newspaper. He always thought his career wouldn't last. When my father and mother were married, he always intended to give up the theater after just one more season and go back to Oklahoma to live. He said he never had to invent jokes. All he had to do was watch the government and report the facts.
The big yell comes nowadays from the taxpayers. I bet you when the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock and they had the whole of the American continent, to themselves, just them and them Pilgrims there, they landed up there, and all they had to do was, to get an extra 160 acres was shoot another Indian, Well, I bet you anything, they kicked on the price of ammunition, I bet they said, what's this country coming to? That we have to spend a nickel for powder. Of course, they got the lead back after they dissected the Indian, but no matter what we pay, I don't care whether we pay high taxes, low taxes, medium taxes, or anything, the yell is always the same. Of course, we know our government is costing us more than it's worth, but do you know of any other cheaper government that's running around now? Do you? If you do, they'll sell you a ticket there anytime. Now, you can try Russia. I was over there. Yeah, you can try Russia. There's no income tax in Russia, but there's no income.
He liked to kid about things. It was his way of getting across his point. And he recommended it to Franklin Roosevelt right after his election in 1932. As president, he said, don't scold the Congress and the Senate, kid them. And that's what Dad himself did.
They used to have photographers just did nothing but just follow our presidents around, just get pictures of them when they fished, Remember that? The president is liable to talk about catching fish off Astor's yacht. He's been down there, but I bet he don't talk on that. For he never did catch anything on that old tub. There's fish in the ocean, but that yacht gets theirs out of the fish market. All these, but there's been 3 photographers starved to death during the Roosevelt administration, waiting for this Astor's yacht to approach even the crawdad anywhere. They ought to put skis on that Astor yacht and go fur hunting. Much obliged. You remember your history, don't you?
This was in the early days of the Depression, the days of plans and planning, the days of the NRA, the WPA, the HOLC. He kidded a lot about plans. Henry Morgenthau, then Secretary of the Treasury, had just released an involved plan for inheritance tax. Always quick to comment on the affairs of the day, this was Will Rogers' immediate response to it.
I presented facts and figures to show you that plans didn't work, you see. But right on top of my advice to not plan, well, it come a plan from Secretary Morgenthau, who's Secretary of the Treasury. But this Morgenthau, the young fella, very able man, he come out with a plan to put a bigger and better tax on these big estates. Inheritance tax it is, to be exact. That is men who died and And on an estate of, say, $10 million, where the government takes about 90% of it, and then giving the offspring 10. And then on estates of 100 million and 200 million or a billion and like that, where the government just takes all of that and notifies the heir, says, your father died a pauper here today. And he's being buried by the, let's see, it'll be the MEBA, the MABE, that's the Millionaires Emergency Burial Association. It's a kind of a branch of the RFC. Now, mind you, I don't hold any brief or any great grief either for a man that dies and leaves millions and hundreds of millions and a billion. But I don't believe Mr. Morgenthau's plan will work. He seems to know just who's going to die each year and how much they're going to leave. Now, brother, that's planning, ain't it, when you figure out that? Now, suppose, for instance, he's got J.P. Morgan scheduled to die on a certain year. And you can bet if they can arrange it, they'll have him die while the Democrats are in, so... But whether he'd be patriotic enough to want to die on this year's schedule or not. Just to make Morgenthau's budget balance, I mean, that's asking a good deal of a man to just die right off just so I can balance my budget. I mean, he might be rather unreasonable and not want to do it. As I say, old men is contrary, and rich old men is also contrary. So in order for Mr. Morgenthau's plan to work out, he's got to bump these wealthy guys off or something. Well, now, that's government's doing everything else, but there is a humane society. I mean,
In his latter years, my father was much better known in political circles than in theatrical circles, and the Senate was his particular hobby. He called it the old joke factory. He used to drop in at Vice President Garner's office and leave his hat. Then he'd go up to the Senate gallery to see, as he used to say, how the boys operate. They were talking about another plan at that time, the famous plowing under farm plan. And Huey Long was offering to share the wealth.
Somebody come along with a plan to plow under part of the cotton. And we did, and other nations like Brazil found out where we plowed it under, and they come and dug it up, and now they've got more cotton than we had. Somebody had a plan to teach hogs birth control, and now it's a habit with them. Somebody had a plan to plow under every third acre of wheat, and the wind come along and blew out the other 2 acres. It was all a fine plan. It was a fine plan, well carried out. We wanted to raise commodity prices, and now we find there's more people eating than there is raising. And if you get things too high, the guys that eat is going to come in hollering, you know? So plans just don't work. If they're milk and honey to you, they're poison ivy to somebody else, you know? But even if your plan don't work, it ain't any discredit, you know. Our own Savior had a plan, in fact, 10 of them. He left them to us, and he knew they'd help us, and we know they'll help us. And he said, love thy neighbors thyself, but I bet there ain't 2 people in your block that's speaking to each other. We know that all these things, we know them all in our own heart, but I don't know, we just ain't going to do them, that's all. And in our own downright conscience tells us that there's no reason why anybody should have more than you. There ain't nothing wrong with the plan, only just one little defect. Nobody ain't going to share it with you, that's all. I know a lot of tremendously rich people that should share their wealth with me, but they just don't see it my way. Then I know folks that ain't got as much as I have that think I ought to share with them. Well, I just can't hardly see it that way either, you know. That is, even if I can see it that way, I'm not doing it. We'll take the case, for instance, of, that'd be just like getting J.P. Morgan to split what he had with the Navajos or something, you know? Morgan would say, well, why should I split with the Navajos? I got nothing in common with the Navajos.
As he kidded other people, he always kidded himself. He used to say, I spent 10 years in the 4th grade and knew more about McGuffey's Fourth Reader than McGuffey did. He never thought of himself as a public figure.
Most comedians are, well, they're just funny to look at, you know. They have some odd defect of the face or just plain homely. Unfortunately, I'm about the only one that's not. Wynn, Benny, Cantor, in fact, any of them that you can mention, well, you have to laugh when you just look at them. They're just odd-looking. While with me, you would say, who is that distinguished-looking man walking toward the microphone? While they command immediate laughter by simply doing nothing, I command a kind of a hushed attention, rather an awe, you know. Immediately you say, there's a man with a message. While theirs is an infectious laugh or a smile, mine is of learning, of culture, of quiet dignity, you would say. There's a brain fuck.
He had great admiration for Florence Ziegfeld. It was in the Ziegfeld Follies, with its repeat audience night after night, that he started to develop his particular style of topical humor. That he first started reading the newspapers and commenting on the events that had happened that very day. The close friendship between my father and Mr. Ziegfeld did not develop until years later. He said he'd never be as lucky again, for no other manager would let him go his own way and do as he saw fit. They never had a written contract.
I just come down here to pay my respects to Mr. Florence Ziegfeld. Had there been no Ziegfeld and no Follies, I would today have been 12 miles north of Claremore, Oklahoma, plowing for corn, slopping the hogs, running my own still, and knocking the Republican Party, as that is considered one of the chores in my country. It's since become universal. I started with the old Follies in '95. It was in a sketch Fanny Bryce and Eddie Cantor, Burt Williams and W.C. Fields were doing, and they needed a baby in the part, and they carried me on. I was nursing on a milk bottle, and they had replaced the milk with gin. Oh, it was a big laugh. The joke was on everybody but me.
In all my little career in the theatrical, in the amusement business, starting way back in 1901, that is, you can call it, whether you'd call mine amusement or annoyance business. In 1901, I worked my way on a cattle boat from Buenos Aires, South America, got into Durban, South Africa, and messed around there and worked on a ranch a little bit, and finally joined a little show called Texas Jack's Wild West Show, way back in 1901. From then on up, so that's 33 years ago, I can truthfully say that I never did miss a show in my life, you know. I've got to a lot of shows patched up from games. I've had all messed up, and one time I got hit in the lip and coming all, and that's a bad place for me to get hit, and I had plenty of lip, and patched up from games and things, and flew in all in planes through the night and everything else to make a show, and very seldom even ever been late and all.
You know, Mr. Ziegfeld, he sent Claire to Oklahoma to get me. The critics raved over me when I first went into New York. Said they never had seen such features. Said I was different. Ziegfeld not only glorified the American girl, but put enough clothes on her to make people want to see her. Mr. Ziegfeld has produced the most wonderful shows year after year of any producer the theater has ever had. Every musical show that's produced is just an imitation of Ziegfeld.
With his interest in politics, he naturally attended the national conventions for many years. In fact, Oklahoma once gave him a favorite son nomination for the presidency. He always insisted they were terrible ordeals, with thousands of people jammed together in a hot, stuffy hall up to the early hours of the morning. He called the national conventions the clam bakes of big politicians. He could see little difference in the two parties. He said that generally the one that's out looks the best. He said our elections were degenerating, that something should be done to give them dignity and importance.
I bet you didn't know that the Revolutionary War was largely financed by lottery. They made it a sporting event instead of a war. George Washington, the history shows that George Washington always had #1 lottery ticket in every lottery. And one time he won. That's when he bought Mount Vernon. And, yes, sir, they made a sweepstakes out of the Revolutionary War. Sold England some tickets, but not the right ones. And they didn't win anything. However, I propose that the real big lottery be made on our national election, see, on the presidential election, which is about, it's about to die out on account of interest anyway, you know. Now, in my plan, everybody that has hopes for running for president on any and all tickets, his name is in there. See, it's all in there, like it is these horses in the Grand National and the Kentucky Derby or any of these sweepstakes. Then a couple of weeks before election, or a month, you draw out these names. Now, when the drawing is over, then those that have drawn tickets on these various candidates, see, now get this, well, then they get out and start working for them, don't you see? So that's where you get the interest in the election, which you haven't got now. Not because they want them for president, but they want to collect all this ticket, don't you see? In that way, we can make our elections a big event. We can make the American election as big a thing as the Grand National in England, you know? And just as important to the world as that is. Or maybe we can make it as big as the Kentucky Derby or Santa Anita Handicap. We would make everybody election conscious, you know? We could sell tickets all over the world and get some of this money back over there instead of us sending it over there, you know? Because those people are great gamblers. Or Europeans, the bigger gamblers as us, and they'll go where the biggest lottery is. Now, we can't have the biggest army and the biggest navy and all that, see? But we can have the biggest lottery, and I believe if you put on the biggest lottery has ever been, I believe we're going to get our debts back. That's what I think, because if they send $1 over and we nick 60 cents out of it, we're going to make some money out of it.
It seemed to Mary, Jimmy, and me that Dad was always going somewhere, always traveling. Sometimes we went with him, but most of the time he traveled alone. He was aviation's biggest booster. He flew more commercial miles on more rickety planes than any one of his time. But wherever he went, he always made a point of visiting his relatives and friends in Oklahoma. He loved Oklahoma, and whenever he wanted to get the feel of the country, he'd go there for a visit. He spoke in all sorts of places, rallies and banquets, county fairs, state legislatures, and he always talked about the topics of the day.
Sacramento, California, that's our capital out here. It's one of the old cities founded during the gold rush days, Sacramento was. They used to use gold for money at one time in this country. But now it's the only thing you can't use for money. You can print some money, or you can issue some bonds and pay the bankers interest on them, but you can use pretty much anything for money in this country with the exception of gold now. They keep that. They keep what gold we've got it's in the warehouse for ballast, I reckon. I don't know what they're using it for. They will let you draw out a little bit every once in a while for your teeth or something. You know.
The Depression worried him. Wherever he went, he saw unemployed. Millions were on relief. He wrote about the needs of the man in the street and about what the government was doing. But this was a time of tension, and many people wrote in criticizing him for dabbling in politics. He said he'd written on nothing but politics for years, and besides, politics was the best show in America, and he was going to go on enjoying it. And one of the things he talked about was government spending.
Well, you know, I figured out it's a peculiar state of affairs that exists, and everybody that is doing better than there was 3 or 4 years ago or making more money has got in for the president. Now, we all know that the government is spending all this money, and it's not a good state of affairs to exist. The country is in bad shape when there ain't nobody spending any money but the government. I bet you couldn't put a strong man in a treasury warehouse full of $100 bills and give him a scoop shovel, and he couldn't shovel out $1 billion in the rest of his life, you know? But now we're working on the word trillion. Trillion, that follows billion and then trillion. You read in the paper, Congress has just been asked to appropriate $2 trillion to relieve the descendants of a race of people called Wall Streeters. The paper will go further on to say, this is a worthy cause, and no doubt this small appropriation will be made, as these are descendants of a once proud race, and after all, they're wards of the government. But now, what you going to do about it? Of course, one remedy would be for the people that have money to start spending it instead of the government. But that seems just about as unpopular. In fact, it's worse. Well, if we sit out and passed a bill tomorrow and said the government can't keep on spending this money, but for a government to exist, somebody has got to spend money. So from this day on, the government's going to stop spending money and make it compulsory that the people do the spending. Boy, what a howl would go up from that, you know. They couldn't make that law stick. People would say, no, we saved it, and we have worked and we've made it, and we got the right to do as we please with it. Well, if the government is throwing this money away, the only thing I see, the ones that they are throwing it to, outside of those that absolutely in need of it, you know, well, the only thing I see is have them refuse it. Just say, no, it's government money, and it's tainted. And I don't believe in the government spending all this money, and hence I don't take any part of it. And I don't believe in the government spending this money, so I'm not going to take it. Here's a man that maybe wants to pay his loan at the bank. Well, maybe the RFC loaned him the money. And they get the money from the government, and they go to pay the bank. And the bank says, I don't believe in the bank. Naturally, all the banks say, I don't believe in the government spending all this money. But when the man comes to pay his loan with government money, they don't say, no, I can't take it. I'll just carry you myself. Boy, what a laugh that'll go. Yeah.
Every once in a while, Dad got his foot into it. Once he playfully mimicked Calvin Coolidge on the radio, and many thought it was actually the president. Dad patched this up with Mr. Coolidge, but he didn't learn to be careful. Dad was proud of his Cherokee blood, and once when he said something about the Pilgrims landing on Plymouth Rock and how they treated the Indians, well, he was in trouble again.
On last Sabbath evening, I referred to the Pilgrims, our Pilgrims landing on Plymouth Rock. Well, boy, you ought to wait till I heard from New England. I split New England just wide open. It seems there's a town up there called Provincetown, and they have adopted a slogan which says, don't be misled by history or any other unreliable source. Here's the place where the Pilgrims landed. This is by unanimous vote of the Chamber of Commerce of Provincetown. Provincetown has been made the official landing place of the Pilgrim. Any Pilgrim landing in any other place was not official. If he landed on Plymouth Rock, it just served him right, that's all. Now, in the first place, I don't think that this argument I've created up there, it's terribly important. The argument that New England has got to settle in order to pacify the rest of America is why were they allowed to land anywhere? That's what we want to know. As a race, there's never been any comparison between a Pilgrim and an Indian. Now, I hope my Cherokee blood is not making me prejudiced. I want to be broad-minded. But I'm sure that it was only the extreme generosity of the Indians that allowed the Pilgrims to land. Suppose we reverse the case. Do you reckon the Pilgrims would ever let the Indians land? Yeah, what a chance. What a chance. The Pilgrims wouldn't even allow the Indians to live after the Indians went to the trouble of letting them land. Well, anyhow, the Provincetown officials, they sent me a lot of official data that when the Pilgrims landed, they found some corn that the Indians had stored, and that the Pilgrims were about starved and that they eat the Indians' corn. And they claimed that the corn was stored at Provincetown. So then you see, the minute the Pilgrims landed, they got full of the corn, and then they shot the Indians. But they'd always pray. That's one thing about a Pilgrim. He would pray, mostly for more Indian corn. But you've never in your life seen a picture of one of these old Pilgrims praying when he didn't have a gun right by the side of him. You know what? That was to see that he got what he was praying for.
My father's boyhood on the plains of Oklahoma had a strong influence on his life. He always wished that he'd come along 50 years earlier, when the Oklahoma Indian Territory was even more of a frontier than when he was born in 1879. He loved Oklahoma, and he was never far from it. In covering the war in Manchuria in 1931, he said that the Manchurian countryside looked like Oklahoma, and that the farmers were just as bad off. And when the great dust storms came to Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Texas in 1933, he was a constant visitor to the stricken areas and called attention to the plight of the victims. This was his country, and he said, with all her dust and all her drought, she's a pretty country. And in his kidding way, he saw something prophetic in it.
I've been reading a lot about how every civilization since time began has been covered up. It's a terrible thing to happen to those people that are out there in the Middle West where it is happening. But on the other hand, it's a great tribute to feel that the Lord feels that you have a civilization that is so advanced that it is the first place to be buried under. I mean, you know, there's something in that, you know what I mean? I didn't think at first that we was that smart, but our Almighty, He must know. Now that it would ever cover up California for the same reason, I got my doubts. So but you know, history has shown the Lord does bury each succeeding civilization and buries them in accordance to the advancement of the people in that neighborhood. I feel proud that I come from that particular Middle West belt. If a civilization had to be buried as it becomes advanced enough, well, we feel proud that we're the ones to be plowed under first, that's all. In years to come, the archaeologists will dig and find Claremore, Oklahoma, and people will come there to the ruins and dig down and say, here lied a civilization, you know what? Well, then later on, they'll unearth the state capitol, you know, and then eventually, as Washington is covered up, on account of its being the least civilized, it'll be the last place covered up. They will excavate and find the old capitol and decipher some of the old hieroglyphics, you know, that people of those days humorously call laws. And they'll find places called banks where the money changers were, you know. Men who in those ancient days lived by interest alone.
Dad liked making motion pictures. No matter what role he was supposed to play, he always played himself. He'd seldom memorize the lines and mostly would just ad-lib his own part. But somehow the studio was able to work out a system that would allow him to have his own way. And whenever he had a chance, he kidded the movies as he kidded himself.
We're up here with a movie company, and the legislature, as I say, they're here, and people can't hardly tell which is which. We're up here making a comedy to try and put over on the people, and they're up here working on one to try and put on the same people. You know, they're going to put this big tax on there. They got some kind of income tax. It's three times bigger than anywhere else. But it won't hook us so bad because we don't have to pay on what we're advertised that we get. We, you know, and we only have to pay on what we get. So this legislature that's in here this afternoon, when they collect that tax, they're going to get a terrible jolt. You know, in this movie thing, another thing, they don't realize that us movie folks, our careers don't last very long. You know, naturally, we're just in as long as our looks, you know. And well, now take me. I'm going twice a week now for a facial, and I'm liable to have to stretch that out into 3 times, you know.
Dad lost his mother when he was 10 years old. He carried her sweet memory with him all his life. This probably was behind the deep feeling he had about all mothers. He frequently talked about mothers and motherhood, and this is what he said on the last Mother's Day of his life.
Mother's Day, it's a beautiful thought, but it's somebody with a hurting conscience that thought of the idea. It was someone who had neglected the mother for years, and then they figured out, I got to do something about Mama, and, you know, and then they says, well, we'll give Mama a day, you know. Then in return, my mother gives you the other 364, see? And I think that was awful liberal of whoever thought of the idea, giving her one out of the 365. You know, we have Apple Week and Don't Beat Your Wife Week and Safety Week and everything. They could have given Mother a week, but that would have been giving Mother a little the best of it. So they says, we'll give Mother a day. And of course, I doubt even then if the thing had gone through if it hadn't been for the florists. They've got a great organization, the florists have. It's nothing unusual any day for me to get a telegram saying, Congressman Jasbo just died. We have special spray of beautiful lilies holding till we hear from you. And, well, maybe I didn't know more than know Congressman Jasbo. But just shows you that these florists are on the job every minute. They have led us to believe that no matter how we have treated our mother during the past year, that a little bouquet of hyacinths, of verbenias, will square it, you know. Not only with Mother, but with our conscience, too. When, as a matter of fact, you don't have to be squared with your mother. She knows you better than you know yourself. A mother is the only thing that is so constituted that they possess eternal love. Under any and all circumstances, no matter how you treat them, you still have the love. I was telling that to my wife today, and I was telling her a little thought that I wanted to use in there, and I said, you know, Betty, I says, a mother and a dog is the only 2 things that has eternal love. That no matter how you treat them, and my wife made me cut the dog out.
Almost anything would give Dad an excuse to travel. If a Hollywood premiere were to be held, he'd take a trip to avoid attending it. Once Mother wired him several days after he'd left and said that the premiere was over. It was all right to come home. He traveled light. He only took one little old soft flat red grip. He used to say that he only need tell it when he was leaving and it would pack itself. He'd throw in a couple of old white shirts and an extra blue serge suit. Oh, yes, avoid attending it. Once Mother wired him several days after he'd left and said that the premiere was over. It was all right to come home. He traveled light. He only took one little old soft flat red grip. He used to say that he only need tell it when he was leaving and it would pack itself. He'd throw in a couple of old white shirts and an extra blue serge suit. Oh, yes, and he'd always take his old portable typewriter. And when he came back, he always had something to report.
Well, sir, I've been off there, I believe it's been about 7 weeks. I went off purposely to see if I couldn't give the country a chance to pick up a little. And it don't take much looking to see that ain't done much since I've been gone. Not only the civilized world has degenerated in the last 7 weeks, but the Democratic Party, too. Well, while I had my head turned, Hitler broke out on me. I thought I had him covered. And tore up the Versailles Treaty. It wasn't a good treaty, but it was the only one they had. And he tore it up. There was a year making it, and he tore it up in about a minute. We got in on the signing of it. We got nothing out of the treaty outside of the pen that we signed with was all that we got. Mr. Eden, England has gone on to talk to Russia. Then France is going to talk to Russia. That's one good thing about European nations. They can't hate you so bad they wouldn't use you.
He liked a kid radio. He was on the first transcontinental radio hookup in history. I remember that for several days our home was filled with electric wires and technicians. He never could accustom himself to the split-second timing of radio. He never wrote a script. He just ad-libbed from rough notes. He'd talk from 10 to 15 minutes and never knew how long it would be. The studio orchestra just had to stand by, prepared to fill. The only way he could stop was by setting an alarm clock. When it went off, he'd finish even if he were in the middle of a sentence. He was amused at the way radio was operated, and like everything else, he kidded this too.
You know, it's hard to tell just what to talk about over the radio. You know, you folks you talk to and you lecture to and you beg to and you even preach and pray to buy something, you know, every minute of the day, you know. Buy a sledgehammer hour, a rat trap hour, husbands don't shoot your wife hour, and there's everything. Now, the other night, Graham McNamee, right during the fight, he says, this fight is brought to Primo Carnero by Max Baer and the Tar Company. And one time, he got him down. He says, they're down, they're fighting, they're down, they're down. I'll tell you who's got the other one down when you buy a set of tires. And by God... By golly, it looked like we was going to have to buy some tires to find out who was down. Oh, Lord, I had a lot of other things here. Hey, wait a minute. Here goes.
One of Dad's radio programs was broadcast from the ballroom of a large hotel in Washington. Many of the senators attended in a body, so he conducted the broadcast as a sort of mock session of the Senate. He ribbed and kidded the senators, but actually he had a lot of affection for them, as he had for Hoover and Coolidge and Harding and Roosevelt and all the other national figures that he told jokes about. And even when he poked fun at them, he sympathized with their problems.
Being a senator is, well, it's not, or a congressman is not much. It just really consists in receiving telegrams. That's about all it is. You just get up and see how many telegrams you got. And these poor fellers, you know they are. I've got great sympathy for our lawmakers. They're just devil to death. Do this or we'll defeat you. Another telegram says if you don't do this, we'll defeat you. And I come to the conclusion that they have a pretty tough time. Well, while maybe they get paid good, we'll admit that, but considering their worry, they earn it. You take thousands and millions of our worthy people are on relief now. Well, they are the ones that everybody naturally sympathizes with. But they have one consolation over a congressman or a senator. They can receive a letter and open it without being called a horse thief or a demagogue or a man that's going to poison the well where the orphans drink. And that's what the poor old lawmaker receives every time he opens his mail. And the rich man, he's in trouble. Nobody is living in more fear than he is today. He's afraid Roosevelt's going to sneak up on him in the night and sandbag him and take all he saved. And the ordinary well-to-do man, or medium class, he thinks he's carrying the whole load. And so it just looks like a time when everybody thinks that somebody else is oppressing him, you know. We are living in an age, you know, when we're trying to, everybody's got it in for us, oppressing us in some way. If the rich are worried, and the senators are worried, and the congressman is worried, and the president is worried, and the middle class is worried, it just looks like
when you add it all up, why, nobody seems to have got the best of it anyhow. So, and if all of them would just quit laying it on to the others for causing their ills and admit, well, maybe I had something to do with it myself.
Dad liked to talk with people, liked to know what they were thinking about. He talked to farmers and ranchers, railroad men and waiters, congressmen and senators, presidents, kings, dictators, everybody. He interviewed Mussolini, kidded the Prince of Wales. Talking with politicians, he got an interesting angle on how they felt about government spending.
You know, the national problem is in this country today is not who shall be relieved and whose money shall relieve him, but who shall be the one that plays Santa Claus and actually hands out the presents, you know. That's the main problem today, is who hands out the presents. Our government is the only people that just love to spend without being compelled to at all. But the government is the only people that don't have to worry where it's coming from.
For many years, Dad had his eye on Russia. He went to Russia to write a series of magazine articles. At that time, way back in 1926, he reported, "The real fellow that's running the whole thing is a bird named Stalin, a great big two-fisted egg from way down in the Caucasian mountains." In 1934, he went back again.
Having finished 2 pictures and a stage play, and finally having caught a calf that I've been roping at between times all summer, I feel like I'm about ready to settle down and do a little steady work. So I'm taking my young with me and going to go clear around the world. I'm heading for Siberia by way of Honolulu, Japan, Manchuria, and then across the Trans-Siberian Railroad. That's 6,000 miles, longest railroad in the world. Say there's some planes flying, maybe take a plane or fly clear across there into Moscow and Leningrad. The reason I'm going to travel so much in Russia and try to go all over Russia, down the Black Sea and all around, see those big experimental farms that farmers are supposed to be working on over there and all that. The reason you know, Russia today is, they're supposed to have the greatest experiment, be trying, the greatest experiment in the world outside of us. So that's why I'm going over there.
What Dad really thought about Russia, he summed up in a brief statement. Luckily, this recorded statement has been saved, though the quality of the recording is poor. But if you listen closely, you can hear his real estimate of Russia.
Russia's getting along pretty good. Yes, that is for Russia. You know, there's naturally things that I don't like about Russia, but there's one about it that you'd all like. That is, there's no communists or Reds there. There wasn't a single agitator in the whole country. Not a soul trying to start a strike or tell somebody else what to do with their job. Yes, sir. You know, communists, you can't get far in Russia. You see, our American communists, they live on making speeches. You can't live on that in Russia. You got to work. There ain't a soapbox orator in Russia. In fact, there ain't a soapbox in Russia. You can't talk for a living there. You got to work for it. You want to get away from communism, as we know communism in America. Why, you go to Russia. No communism there. No. One of our communists over home couldn't get in Russia in 100 years. If they started criticizing the government over there, and you will receive a long train journey. You look out some morning on the north tip of Siberia with nothing staring you in the face but the Arctic Ocean.
On his various travels around the country, Dad was often invited to talk to state legislatures. He always liked this and liked to kid them. He said that the biggest problem was to get them to adjourn and go home. California had a good idea: stop their pay. Nothing, he said, dampens a legislator's public spirit like cutting off his salary. But in lots of states, they had to burn down the Capitol to get them out. Well, here's one of his comments on legislatures.
There's nothing will upset a state's economic condition like a legislature. better to have termites in your house than the legislature. Well, they're in there trying to figure out ways and means. But they're doing pretty good, the legislature. The other day they repealed a law up here where everybody that's married, you know, you're married, you had to give 3 days notice. You used to have to in this state give intention of marrying. Well, they did away with that now. That was longer than most of the marriages in California was lasting. So now you don't have to file any intention of marrying at all. In fact, you don't even have to give your right name. According to the new law, you just pay a small amusement tax is all.
Dad always seemed to be saying the first thing that popped into his head, but actually this was not so. At home he'd read the newspapers, jot down notes, and then figure out what he was going to say. Of all the things he talked about, his favorite subject was plans. The more complicated life became, he said, the more plans there were. And this is how he talked about them.
I'm working on what's called the Rogers plan. You know, just about 3 more Welsh rabbits every night, and I'll be ready for the Rogers plan. Anyhow, don't do anything. Now, don't sign up with any of these other plans, because I believe I've got a better offer for you than any. And don't be too critical of the present plan. For as long as we're all living on the loot, well, we can't holler about it, see? But I don't care what they offer you, I'll do better. You know what I mean? I'll do better. Congress got a plan. Their plan is to keep it a secret where the money is coming from. That's one of their plans. Mr. Hoover's got a plan. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's got something to do with moving east next fall. Now, the Republicans, they got a plan. Their plan is to do nothing, and then Roosevelt can't either. The Democrats, they got a plan. Well, they got millions of them. You couldn't hardly mention all of theirs, but the Democrats' plan is hold the post office, boys, they shall not pass. That's all. Now, big business, Roosevelt says, can't you reform and recover too? Well, no, we can't do anything with a cop on every corner watching everything we do. Give us a chance. Then honest, when we're able, we'll reform. And then besides, they asked Mr. Roosevelt, Mr. Roosevelt, we never know what you're going to do next. Roosevelt says, neither do I. Well, no, he can't ask. Now, my plan, to state it in a nutshell, in fact, that's where all plans come from. And the nuts should never be cracked. My plan is a plan to end all plans. My plan, which is still in the nutshell, is when a senator, a congressman, or even a man of great ability we was quit joking about those boys because they're good guys, you know. The real congressmen and senators, all right. Every time we ever let one out, a worse one gets in, that's all. These old boys that have got plans, they've been working on them for a long time. I've been getting a lot of mail and advice this week, and the college professors have been wanting to help me. You'd be surprised at the amount of them that Roosevelt has let out, and they're out of work, and they're just dying to get in with some other plan now. And the big moneyed interest, I've been hearing from them. They've been trying to find out what I've got to offer them in their plan. Seems like they claim that Roosevelt left them out entirely, and they want to get in with me, I think. They claim the Republicans have included them in their plan, you know, but that they're afraid that while they'll be in the plan, that they won't be in the vote. You know.
Between the times when Dad was watching the political scene in Washington, traveling abroad, or visiting back in Oklahoma, he was always hurrying back to Hollywood to make another movie. He kidded Hollywood and the movies just as he kidded everything else. When there was talk of the motion picture industry moving away from Hollywood to avoid taxes, this is what he said about it.
Oh, I got to tell you about the movies. And if we put certain tax on to say we're going to leave. One gentleman, Mr. Sam Goldwyn, this morning says we're going to England. Where are you going? I tell you, I bet you we don't go nowhere. I bet you that we don't go east of Vermont Avenue. I mean, that's what I bet. We're going the movies is we're in an industry that kind of depends on the goodwill of the people, and they overlook the biggest thing in all this moving. You can't get much goodwill by dodging taxes, you know, because I don't care where you go, they'll bring you in there, you know, and say, you boys don't pay anything, you know. But those guys that says you don't pay nothing, they ain't there next year, you know what I mean? They're washed up and gone home somewhere, you know. Now, they ain't going to go. But I don't know where we're going to go. If we go to New Jersey, I can see, here's a scene from New Jersey. You know, you folks on the radio maybe can't see this like my audience here. An actress playing a scene in front of the camera in New Jersey. I love you. Oh. Those mosquitoes. I love you. Now, say we go down south. They're talking a good deal about us going down in North and South Carolina somewhere. Well, that's wonderful states. I've been down there a lot in the great old states and all, but naturally the influence of the people would have an effect on you. Now, if we go down in North and South Carolina, I can just see Greta Garbo coming before the street, and Greta Garbo says, yeah, I sure do love you, doggone, I sure, yeah, sir, yes, I sure do love you. I think I'll go home. I ain't gonna mess around here no longer. Oh, here, wait, I ain't through. I got a lot to do. Goodbye. Good night.